Welcome, everybody, to the Lenders Online Training live stream session, or should I dare say podcast. We're starting to get a following, everyone. I'm Dave Stauffacher, the Senior Credit Trainer with Lenders Online Training, where we help lending and credit professionals say yes to good loans. We say it with confidence, be consistent with it, and actually a way to kind of stand up to some scrutiny that some of our lenders may get. So actually today we're going to be talking something a little bit different. Instead of kind of answering some of the questions that our listeners have sent to us, which we greatly appreciate, I want to remind them of that, keep them coming in. We're going to pull back the curtain a little bit and actually have a conversation with kind of about what some banks are actually having today, or most likely will be having soon with their examiners. So what am I saying specifically? What do examiners or regulators, if you want to call them that, really want to see when they look at your credit training program? Now, it's not just a simple question. It's not something that they ask for clarity, say, do you train your people? It's kind of deeper than that. Basically, can your people actually defend and prove what they're actually been trained to do, which is an interesting perspective. So, and with that conversation, I am pleased to say my colleague at Lenders Online Training, who has plenty of time interacting with those examiners over the years, it's my colleague with Lenders Online Training, Senior Trainer, Joe Davis. Hi, Joe. How you doing?
Good, good. Great to be here, David. Thank you so much. And for those of you that don't know me, I spent over 25 years in commercial banking, particularly credit and lending leadership roles. And most recently, I was chief credit officer of a $1.2 billion community bank. So I have spent more time than I'd care to admit across the table from regulators. Always fruitful conversations. Don't get me wrong, but I was also the one that was really making sure that our team could actually defend every credit decision in our portfolio, particularly on those larger deals and deals with maybe a little bit more hair on them, some complex situations. Now, these days, I spend my time training the people who do that work, which gives me a pretty clear view of where banks and credit unions struggle, the feedback they're getting, the concerns that they have, and also, most importantly, and on topic for today, really where examiners are focusing.
25 years? My goodness.
Hard
I'm
to
actually
believe,
going to
isn't
look I'm going to look forward to this discussion. You know, Joe, I know
it?
we've talked about this, maybe some of the listeners. My career actually began in the financial world. Kind of progressed through consumer lending. I started the credit and review process at the community bank that I worked at, and then I progressed into commercial lending and loved it. And then, despite actually moving on and progressing through my career on the what I would say institutional side, I went across the table to the private side. I worked in industry, helped in a turnaround situation. And of course, what I'm doing here in my consulting role, teaching here, I'm involved with community banks and credit unions for my SBDC role. And the credit unions also led into some certified development companies, you know, those ones that do the 504 loans. So I work with a lot of companies, even municipalities. So a topic like this, when we're dealing with examiners or we're doing like credit reviews, I think this is some very interesting stuff and a topic that I'd like to explore a little bit deeper. So why does this even matter? I mean, Joe, I think from my perspective, something's different. And I don't know if I can put my hands on it, but I think something has changed. I mean, examiners, I mean, granted, they always care about credit quality, but I'm starting to sense that their questions appear to be changing. And some of my bank colleagues that I've worked with for years have said the same thing. So I'm curious what you actually see from your perspective.
Yeah, it's a great point. You're absolutely right. It has changed. I think back to earlier in my career, but the big shift is this: examiners aren't just reviewing loans anymore. They're not just pulling out a file and checking a box. They're reviewing the people behind those loans. Who is analyzing these deals? Who is decisioning them? Who is actually making those judgment calls? 10, 15 years ago, the training conversation was pretty casual, right? It was, what are you doing to develop your lenders and your credit analysts? You give kind of a general answer and sort of move on. We do some on the job, we take a couple of courses here. And that was generally good enough for them. They take their clipboard and go like that. but Today, it's much more pointed. Later on in my career, but also in talking to banks and credit unions, the discussions are more like, what training are you offering? How often are you doing it? On which topics specifically are you doing that? And then the big one is, how do you know it actually worked? What is the follow up? How do you know you're getting bang for your buck and the training is actually doing what you intended to do? They want specifics. They want outcomes as well. And that's the big shift that I'm seeing. It seemed to me previously it was a bit perfunctory, that discussion, and now it's actually, well, no, training leads to good credit decisions, which leads to lower risk, which leads to healthier banks. That to me is really the tone that has changed over these past, call it 10 or 15 years.
So in essence, they're actually connecting training directly to financing, directly to job performance, credit quality. They're actually investing into something like that. They see the importance value of that. I think back in the day, all right, I've been around. Back in the day when I was a banker, first of all, conversation with the bank examiners was just unnerving, right? We knew that they were coming, right? And it was just uncomfortable because we didn't know what they would find. And I didn't mean that in a negative context, but you just never know, right? Someone looks at my file and they're missing something, and then I have to defend that. But I think in those days, what they would ask us really didn't have anything to do about training. It was basically about, did we know the guidelines? So it was kind of like training was the guidelines within the bank. Did we understand the guidelines and were we consistent with it? So I think not only did we know the guidelines, were we able to apply the guidelines, and it was kind of justified based on looking their credit files, etc. But were we consistent? Now, and I've known a couple of banks that have had some examinations over the last 24 months, things are different. The conversations are changing. They spend a lot of time with these banks and credit unions, and they want to really understand the whole analysis. Are the trainers, who are they going for training? It's not an issue of, was this person trained? I mean, now sometimes some of these banks, I'm not going to, some of the lenders have been around for a long, long time. I probably would have been the same way to say, I've been around here for 15 years. So, that doesn't work anymore. I too, or anyone that's been in the business for a while, still needs to be trained and up to speed on things, right?
Yeah, that really hits home with me, David, what you just said there, that no longer is a tenure replacement for solid foundational understanding of accounting and finance and banking and how to lend money. I had a situation several years ago. We had a large problem credit, and we analyzed the heck out of it. Big deal, had some issues. We sliced and diced that thing 6 ways to Sunday. And, we put that all in the file, and we thought, man, when they look at this credit, they're going to be really impressed that we analyzed it like this and we did so much work and spent so much time. I was really quite proud. Well, what happened when they came in, they ran their own financial statement spreads, and they caught a fundamental first round error on those. And, I looked at it and they were right. And the problem is, even though I had a very senior credit analyst who read those statements, they didn't understand a kind of a fundamental accounting issue that popped up on their tax return. So what we had flawed source data. Every time I ran a scenario or an analysis after that, so it essentially threw out all of my prep work that I done to prepare for this exam on this large credit. And it started at square one. It started with that very basic and foundational understanding that could have been solved with some training and having my senior analysts who've been around for years better understand accounting, specifically tax return accounting.
Wow. I can see how that happens. We take a lot of pride in what we do as lenders. We think we have everything documented, but it can happen. And I think at times, if we can just be really honest about it, to say, okay, and we ran it, to say, oh my goodness, yes, this is wrong. I mean, they caught something, but something that we can actually learn upon. It's never been, I've known some examiners over the years. It's never been, I caught you. That wasn't the exercise. It's okay. we talk about it, we learn about it, and then how do we fix it for now? So, I mean, I think as we kind of progress through our conversation today is, all right, can we break this into something practical? Can we list about, what would be 4 things that maybe examiners want to see in a credit training program? In other words, they want us to be developed. They want, how could we be better? Because we're all out here to mitigate risk. So what things could there be?
Yeah, good point. And I really like lists. I like giving people very practical things to take
Yeah,
away. So this is not just academic.
yeah,
Um, the first thing that comes to mind for me, Dave, is a structured curriculum. And what you just said a little while ago, experience is not a curriculum. Examiners want to see a documented program with defined expectations. They want to see how you onboard your new analysts and lenders, what they're learning in the first 6 months, what they're learning in the first year, how you get them up to that point where they're proficient and independent. They want to see what experienced lenders refresh every couple of years. Even though I was in banking for almost 30 years, I took training every single opportunity I possibly could to stay fresh and keep up with it. And then also how that training ties back to your lending policy. You mentioned consistency. That's really what we're talking about here. Does the person in this office do it the same as the person down the hall? Do they do it the same as the bank, the office down the street? Do they do it the same as the one 2 states away? They want to see that you understand your policy and that you're applying it consistently. So when I was chief credit officer, I mapped our training directly to our credit policy. I took our policy and said, it says this, therefore my training needs to cover this. So policy required a global cash flow analysis, for example, which it did. Training had to teach global cash flow. If it required sensitivity analysis, training had to cover sensitivity analysis. I had to make sure that my team was prepared and that they could actually run that analysis. So the loan policy was actually a really good guide for me as I laid out what I wanted my analysts and lenders to learn. So any disconnect between that policy and training shows up really quickly in an exam, because the first thing they do is they say, show me your loan policy, show me your 10 biggest problem loans. I want to compare those. And they absolutely will, and they should.
yeah.
That's how I would do that as well. So that's really how I started. What do you think, David?
I could basically, I concur with that. And I find it so, and some of our listeners here today, some of the banks that we've worked with at Lenders Online Training, they have several different branches. They're in different regions of the state or the country. And to be able to develop that consistency of a program and to be able to, let's use the marching band analysis, right? I don't necessarily care if the trombone section are quite in tune versus the trumpet section, but they're all moving in the same process. They're all doing it consistently. And I think any type of training program that at least had that overall focus to say, these are our guidelines and we're consistently going to follow them. All right, we might have to, we might not be in tune quite as well, but as long as we're going in the same direction consistently amongst all those branches and locations, I think we're better off at exam time, right?
Yeah, really great point. That hits home. When I was at a much larger bank, we had offices all over the country, and maintaining that consistency was really challenging. But you absolutely had to do it. You had to prioritize it.
Yeah. All right, I got another idea. Number 2, measurable competency. Now, I really like this one because my personal mantra basically has been measuring what matters equals impact. We measure everything in today's society for whatever reason. There's something, a number to it, or just are we going in the right way? So measuring competency. So what does that actually mean? How does it apply to training? Well, attendance is not evidence. And just kind of going through the motions, showing up for a webinar, checking the box off, doesn't work. Really shouldn't work, right? Is it being applied? And I think that's the challenge for many of us that are busy in the lending world, is spending some time for them to understand it. Reading it is one thing, listening to it is one thing, but then being able to apply it in your own world is another, because I'm trying to take what I've been kind of taught, introduced to, and do something with it. And then heaven forbid, if I actually are able to teach others, I kind of get it, right? That's the full cycle of learning. So one of the things, if we say, how do we know if our bankers, our underwriters, how do we know if they get it? Measure it. Do some pre-test, post-assessments. We've done that over the years at Lenders Online Training. Our students that have taken our program and then have progressed through it have seen a huge difference in measurable output as far as what they've learned. So I think pre and post is a big thing. It's kind of showing the fact that we are learning something. Yeah, we may not be perfect. That's not the point of the exercise, but we are moving in the right direction and learning how to apply it. Make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And as you were talking about that, two things came to mind. There's an old saying, and I'm probably slaughtering it, but it's essentially what gets measured gets done. So what you're talking about is exactly that. And also, we live in a time where we can get real-time data essentially anytime we want. We can get reams and reams of data. So KPIs, or key performance indicators, are something we should all develop, something we should all have, including around things like training and experience. I don't think those are, while those are not as black and white as, say, overdrafts, for example, you can measure it, anything. So certainly I would do some measuring and show actual tangible results. And when my examiners came, I would put that data right in front of them. And I think that would be really, really impactful for them. You know, what comes to mind too, number 3 is ongoing development. Credit analysis isn't just set it and forget it. It's not, that late night infomercial anymore. Tax laws change. The world changes. Entity structures get more complex. We've all seen that 300-page tax return because the individual owns fractional shares of a lot of different entities, dozens of them, for example. Also, loans get bigger. It's just a matter of inflation, and deals are going to get bigger over time. So a training event every couple of years tells an examiner nothing about today's competency. They want to see refreshers, advanced topics, things that are specific to your bank, credit union. They want to see ongoing access to expertise, not just necessarily on the job training. But in short, what they're looking for, and what I think we should all strive for as an industry, is just keeping up with the times and keeping these things top of mind as well.
I love that. I got another one here. This is actually kind of coming from you. I remember one of your phrases said, "Paper the file."
I'm still waiting on my T-shirt, David.
I know. Mine's got to say depends. I got to work on with Linda to say we're going to have depends. When we talk about guidelines. Well, so Joe, you used to always say your comment was paper the file, documentation. Now, I will say the same thing, and I will do that. I even had the conversation today when I was teaching with one of the webinars that we're going through at Lenders Online Training, as we talked about documentation. I am a stickler for that, whether it's paper, whether it's electronic, whether nowadays you can record something, lots of options that are available, get it in there. You're kind of defining which, it's kind of one of those other contexts as far as one of the C's of credit is, what is going on? Now, when an examiner, a regulator comes in and wants to look at the file or look at those files that are, not performing, it happens, is they want to understand what has been going on, what has progressed with that business, what conversations have we had, what has the client been doing, what is the overall risk with that relationship, and how do we see it, and what have we done about it? And I think that's the biggest thing that sometimes is lax. Sometimes people don't have time to do it. Sometimes people fail to do the notes. But if there's one thing that I think that would kind of make everybody happy is documentation. Whether they agree with what our comments are or not, I think is a different issue. We can always discuss the argument as to why I said that, why I believe things, but at least document that. It puts minds at ease. You're seeing something. So document. We talk about it that, the other adage when you say about it that if there's nothing in there, an examiner's not going to give you credit if something that they can't see, right? And they basically said you didn't ask the questions. Make sense?
Yeah, that's a great point. A lot of exams now are done remotely.
Yeah.
We live in the internet age, and also COVID changed the world. So a lot of times they don't even come on site anymore. So you have to put things in the file. You don't have that necessarily face-to-face communication with them nowadays. So some things have been a little lost in that regard. But I think about this. We have to prove to our examiners that every single one of our took applicable compliance training. We have to show them documentation for that. Well, shouldn't we just go that next step further and say, here's the credit analysis training that we also took, here's the lending training that we also took? It's not a very big leap to get to that
No.
next point. In terms of papering the file, absolutely. Things like customer call notes, commercial relationship management, CRM file, customer relationship management, all those things. It's two sides of the same coin. The training should certainly apply as well. Let's switch gears a little bit
Okay.
now. Let's talk just honestly about what doesn't work. So we gave some best practices. Let's talk about some things that
Okay.
don't work. And I'll
Interesting.
admit it. I made this mistake fairly early in my career. Experienced lenders often learned different methods over decades, right? Bankers move around a lot. So maybe they
Okay.
learned how to do something and then they switch banks, or
Yep.
maybe they learned it at a different time than some other folks that have come on. So, without sort of a formal training program, these inconsistencies really show up. They show up in things like cash flow, risk ratings, portfolio monitoring, and also documentation. To your point, David. So that's what examiners flag as really weak in credit administration. You mentioned earlier, and I thought it was a really good point. Those inconsistencies. They can disagree with a call that you made.
Yep.
What they don't like is when you're not following loan policy, or you have inconsistencies across deals and inconsistencies across people. That's really where they start looking at your CAMELS rating and looking at that M, which stands for management, on your scorecard.
We had a podcast with Sarah Kraft a little while ago, and she talked a lot about how important communication is with the banks and their bankers across the different divisions, and how challenging that can be between the banker and the young analysis or the head of credit in any ways, and the importance of really trying to strive for communication, to be engaged with the borrower and documenting that. I can't remember that specifically what she'd said, but we really were focusing on the whole impact of communication and the challenges that we banks struggle with. And it happens. It's reality. I mean, any organization, even professional sports teams, right? They always talk it's the lack of execution, miscommunication. It's the challenges that we deal with. So I remember that from Sarah when our conversation.
Yeah.
Here's another mistake. I hear this a lot. It's well, I learned it on the job. It's on the job training. We hired you, you've got a little bit of a background, you went through college, you work for another bank, and okay, and here you go. Well, that's kind of invisible, right? I mean, we don't know how that individuals, what they're training around, and and how they brought whatever, if they were even trained very well of the other organization, or that if it's just by visual and okay, they read our guidelines, but there was lack of interaction. How do they apply that? I mean, it happens quite often. It happened in the banks that I worked at. I was fortunate as I developed through my career. I actually went to, an organization that is, I'm going to say no longer around. It was Norwest. I went to Norwest Credit University, Norwest Bank Credit University, which is now Wells Fargo, which was wonderful. They huge training background. And I remember some of the things that we were there today. So, but it was very structured and kind of reverse some of the things that I had learned at the community bank just by observing things. So on the job training, I'm not saying it doesn't work, but I think it needs to be further developed and enhanced by other activities.
Oh, agree. Old habits die hard. And I remember early in my career, I had a very seasoned lender tell me, you don't really need Schedule K1. he just said, well, just look at the Schedule E and you can kind of guesstimate what they might have taken. And I was trying to do that for a while, even though I think I knew better. But here's this guy 40 years in, and he was telling me that. And I finally learned why I needed those, what those meant, and that in order to run a proper cash flow. But that just certainly comes to mind when you're talking about that on-the-job training and passing down bad habits. That's really scary because that can kind of snowball as well. Because if I would have trained somebody in the interim, I probably would have just echoed what he said. But mistake number 3, and I think this one, we're living in the information age. This certainly comes to mind. Assuming software replaces skill. Software helps us spread numbers. It helps us to be more efficient. I remember when I started out in banking, I was using Lotus 123. Most of you on the call probably don't know what that is. It's predecessor to okay, there you go. Predecessor to Excel. That was the first spreading tool that I had. And now I think about the loan origination systems that we have today and how complex they are. And it's amazing how far we've come. Those are great tools. They really, really are. You still have to understand the numbers. Those software does not replace judgment. It does not replace the human brain. And I won't open the can of worms that is AI, but still there is a need for people in this business. It is still a people business. We still make judgment calls. I always say in my career, I never operated in the black and white. If it was black and white, a computer could do it. I operated in the gray, and that's how I earned my paycheck for almost 30 years, was operating in the gray areas and making those calls. So examiners are going to ask, walk me through how you got this number. And if the answer is, oh, our system calculated it, that's going to be a problem. They don't want to hear that. They want to know that you understand what a current ratio is and how it's calculated, for example. They don't want to say, oh, I just pull it off this page. Well, that's not going to work. That's not going to fly. So understanding the numbers, getting behind those, even though we have amazing software at our fingertips now, still need people and they still need to understand how all these things work.
So agreed. So agreed. Even you and I have been approached during our training with Lenders Online Training. Is many of the banks that we've worked with already have a software platform. So they take a number and then it'll say what line to grab it from. You grab it and you put it in there. But we were kind of at a quandary to say, do we teach to someone software, or do we teach more fundamentals of the actual paper, pencil, or whatever, and they actually have to go to that tax return and understand what's the context of that number before they put it on that form? And I think we still come back to the reality is it's nice to have the platform that people can use for efficiencies, but I think it's important that they understand the gap as to why or where that number came from, the importance of that number, so then when they put it in their platform and it does all the calculations for efficiency, they know why they grabbed that number, not that because it was on line 7. Make sense?
Yeah, understanding the context. Software is a tool. It's not going to replace a body, at least not yet. And that includes AI.
I agree.
You think about the amount of AI hallucination and slop that we see, that concerns me. So we can't be overly reliant on software.
True. So true. All right, I'll leave us with number 4. Waiting until after the finding. Like, oops.
Too late.
Yeah, once we have that consent order and cite some training deficiencies, then the examiner sets the rules, right? We kind of fell down there. So I think what we've kind of the gist of some of the mistakes that we talked about, being proactive, getting the training done, getting good training done. I think it's cheaper in the long run. I think you develop a better quality staff. And I think, it's less painful in the end, right? We're human. We could make mistakes, but I think investing in your people, investing into the program of your organization is a fundamental that successful banks have been doing for a long, long time. You can still grow your portfolio, but as long as you do it in sound measures. So that's kind of our mistakes. So how about we'll change gears again as we're getting towards a little bit towards the end of the program. All right, so what does a training program look like, right? So I mean, in essence, it's what we do at Lenders Online Training. We focus a lot with understanding the tax world of things, the personal returns, the 1040s. We have programs that talk about the personal returns 1040s. We have the advanced tax returns where we get into the 1065s, the 1120s, 1120Ss. We talk about K1s. Now, Linda and I did a very lengthy program, our live cast similar, that we went through several episodes when we were talking about pass-through entities. It's confusing. That's probably one of our highest read blog series for them trying to understand how do you deal with a K1. You mentioned before not using the K1, just going to the Schedule E. We know that that's not right. So I think, and we also talk about global cash flow. Many of the small businesses that we deal with, a lot of the community banks, credit unions, we deal with small businesses that have a variety of affiliations, separate LLCs, separate companies, and it's important to understand everything. So I think those are the fundamentals of our program, and then you get into financial statement analysis. I know Lenders Online Training, we really core to income tax, but you will know, Joe, you know this, I really stress the financial statement analysis. I think it's important to understand that, not just the ratios. And honestly, I think some of the ratios in the community bank world has really never been addressed as much. And I can recognize that. Middle market, okay, they do talk about that.
Oh, yeah.
But the one area that I really love to focus on is the sources and uses and that statement of cash flows, understanding the interworkings of the business. That type of a program, those are fundamentals. And I think every bank should do that and teach their people on that. I think it's a wonderful asset. And for some of the participants, even today, the individual I was working with, this is a skill set I think that really can advance your understanding. And it's a great thing for your bank underwriters that when they look at it, say, these individuals know their stuff. And they can be not only valuable to the bank and mitigating risk, but they can also be valuable to their clients, helping them understand that. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. And, I think back when I was kind of midway through my career, the OCC, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, was my main regulator. They were so impressed at how well my team was prepared and how well trained they were. They actually brought some of their new examiners in fresh out of college, and my team trained them, which was, fantastic. Nice pat on my back. And, I really thought that was great that they placed that much trust on me. But it's exactly what you're talking about, David. It's the fundamentals and making sure everybody applies them consistently and understands them front end. And I also think delivery matters. Things like real life case studies. I use the phrase at bats, right? You can only compress time so much. So actually doing deals, looking at realistic scenarios, real life case studies, I think it's a really, really good way to apply what we learned. So it's not, again, not just academic, but it's also very practical. And then that practice, just doing it over, a little bit of repetition. I learned this. I need to probably do it a couple of times before I really, really understand it. And then also getting that feedback from experienced credit professionals, either internal or someone like you or someone like me, for people that are going through training so that they can say, okay, so we talked about this concept. I got this deal. I think it applies. Here's what I want to do. What do you think? That is invaluable for people in order to get them up to speed and help them learn. And then also, I just think that, again, that combination of academic as well as practical learning is really key. But that's the difference between knowing the theory, but then also being able to apply it, being able to defend that loan when you're sitting across the desk or more likely sitting across an email from an examiner.
Perfect. We talked about a lot of stuff today. I thought it was a great conversation that we were kind of got into a little bit of the weeds. Yes, it's a slightly different approach of what we do for training, but I think to get it into the minds of what we want to do is add some value with some of the conversations that we have from Joe's experience. I think we touched on some great ideas, challenges, mistakes. We all have them and how we can get better. So it's Monday morning. Right? The game's over. Now it's time to be the quarterback. And what do we learn? What can I leave you with? I will say there's probably 3 practical steps that I would think is something to document down. Number one, audit your training documentation. Now, granted, we talked about documentation with regards to our clients. I get that. But how we train, what do we do? How do we communicate our guidelines? How do we review our guidelines? Making sure, Joe talked about this, consistency. We're marching in the same direction if we're using the analogy of the marching band. So audit your training documentation. Number two, identify where your shortfalls are, your gaps. Now, Linda and I talked at great length about K1s in our pass-throughs. It's confusing. It's confusing. So who's being trained on K1s? Because that exists today for those pass-through entities that don't pay taxes, but the individuals do. Who's trained on those? What do they know? That would be important. Who actually knows global cash flow? Remember, we talk about in small business lending that we deal with that have so many different entities. How do we understand it? How do we put the pieces together? And I think the third thing, kind of lay out the pathway. Build a plan. Let's recognize that we can always be better with what we are doing today, despite our busy, despite us wanting to grow our portfolio, despite our different branches in a variety of states. Let's build a plan that we can follow with good intentions. So when an examiner does have, this is our training program. We take a lot of pride in our people. We commit to our people because we think at the end, those fundamentals are kind of the support of our organization. Any thoughts, Joe?
Yeah, well said. And I really like that last point, build a plan. I like that you talked about communicating that plan as well, because if the examiners can't see what you were thinking, they will step in with their own assumptions, and you don't want that, right? You want them to be able to see what you've done and the results from that. So I really liked how you mentioned that, building a plan, David. And this is exactly the work we do every day at Lenders Online Training. We help community banks and credit unions build structured, defensible credit training that actually improves loan quality. I've taken 6 and 7 figure losses in terms of credit losses. So a little bit of preemptive, making sure everybody understands training makes a lot of sense. It's a very small price to pay. But, really, if this conversation resonates, please reach out through our website or connect with us on LinkedIn. We'd absolutely love that.
Awesome, Joe. I mean, if you're not sure yet, check out our free demo. There'll be a download that we'll pass through. That was kind of a recap of what we talked about today. But the free demo I think it's worth a visit. Check out what we do. Joe, we've had great conversations today. I loved your insight, especially from your perspective of being the chief credit officer. I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot just from working with you. I appreciate that. For our followers and our growing podcast, thanks for listening. I really appreciate that. Don't forget, drop us questions. Check us out at Ask the Experts. Suzanne's going to put that little snippet on the screen for it. But check us out. And until next time, have a great time. Have a great day. Look forward to talking to you again. Bye now.
Thanks, David. Thanks, everybody.